From its inception, Unrivaled aimed to flip the power dynamic in women's basketball. Player equity, high pay, and control were its rallying cries. But once Project B entered the arena, all that idealism met the hard wall of scale and capital. The new league didn't just offer more money. It introduced global expansion, operational sophistication, and a more aggressive recruitment model. Suddenly, Unrivaled's value proposition fell thin. Internally, the leaked audio reveals a mounting sense of desperation as top-tier players, lured by international visibility and bigger checks, started walking out the door. This isn't just a story of one league losing ground. It's a full-on exposure of how fragile disruptor models can be when they collide with real-world market forces. Unrivaled bet on a vision. Project B bought the future. The result is a growing chasm between purpose and power, with Unrivaled caught in the middle. As the clock ticks toward future seasons, especially with the looming uncertainty around the 2026 WNBA schedule, the very structure of women's basketball in the U.S. is under threat. The choices made now won't just determine which league survives. They'll define who controls the narrative for years to come. So here's the truth. The collapse of Unrivaled didn't happen overnight. It wasn't one scandal, one deal, or even one betrayal that did it in. This was a slow bleed, death by disruption, bad timing, and the brutal arrival of a bigger, bolder competitor with far more money to throw around. But the leaked audio? That's what made the writing on the wall official. That's what took all the whispered doubts and laid them bare. Unrivaled entered the scene with something close to a manifesto. High salaries, equity ownership, a structure that put power in the hands of the players. For a moment, it looked like the answer to years of imbalance in women's professional sports. Athletes were excited. Fans were intrigued. Investors were cautiously optimistic.
If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe.
And it had one big thing going for it: timing. This came at a moment when conversations around gender equity in sports were reaching new volume. The market was hungry for change. But change only works if you can keep momentum. And momentum is exactly what Unrivaled lost the moment Project B entered the chat. Project B didn't play fair, but then again, it didn't have to. It showed up with significantly more funding, global ambitions, and a ruthless recruitment strategy. It didn't try to build from scratch with a player empowerment model. It bought legitimacy with contracts no one else could match. In business terms, it executed a hostile takeover, only it didn't need a boardroom. It used signing bonuses and private jets. And then came the shift. Key players, especially big names like Alyssa Thomas, started making the jump. And not quietly. Alyssa wasn't just any signing. She was a 6-time WNBA All-Star, a founding partner of Unrivaled, someone whose presence gave the league credibility. When she went all in on Project B, it wasn't just about the paycheck. It was about leverage. She had equity in Unrivaled, and still walked away. That's how big the gap had become. Unrivaled's response? Hasty, rushed, and awkward. The announcement that Alyssa was leaving felt slapped together. The promotional content was low quality, almost amateurish. And in a world where branding is everything, that misstep said more than the departure itself. It revealed a deeper issue. Unrivaled didn't have a plan. It didn't have the infrastructure to respond to real competition. And once that became obvious, the narrative started slipping out of their hands. Then the audio leaked, and with it came confirmation of everything the public had started to suspect. Leadership scrambling, internal confusion, a league caught off guard and outmatched. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about competence, about trust, and players started to lose both. Project B's advantage wasn't just in its wallet, it was in its timing. The league is built for international expansion, with games across Europe and Asia, tapping into global markets in ways Unrivaled hadn't even begun to approach. That sounds great until you get into the details. Different time zones, fragmented broadcasts, and reduced visibility in the U.S. None of that is ideal for American players trying to grow their personal brands. But even with those challenges, Project B made itself look like the future. And in a business where perception equals power, that was enough. Because the branding question matters. A lot. Athletes, especially in women's sports, can't rely on salaries alone. Their income depends heavily on endorsements, sponsorships, and staying in front of domestic audiences. If fans can't watch, sponsors don't pay. If visibility dips, opportunities dry up. And Project B's strategy, while bold, risks undermining that. It forces athletes to choose international paychecks or domestic relevance. Unrivaled could have used that as a wedge. Positioned itself as the more stable, US-based option that prioritized visibility and long-term brand growth. But they didn't move fast enough. They didn't control the message. And by the time they started reacting, it was already too late. And now it's not just about two off-season leagues fighting for control. It's about the entire landscape of women's basketball. The WNBA is watching this unfold while facing its own looming crisis. The very real possibility of a canceled 2026 season. That's not a minor hiccup. That's a catastrophic scenario that could dismantle the entire infrastructure of women's basketball in the U.S. Without the WNBA as an anchor, everything becomes unstable. Players lose leverage. Sponsors lose confidence. Leagues like Unrivaled, already struggling, collapse completely. And a vacuum left behind? That's where Project B is hoping to plant its flag. The future is a three-way tug-of-war between Unrivaled, Project B, and the WNBA itself. Only one of them can come out on top. And right now, Unrivaled looks the most vulnerable. Strategic missteps have compounded the damage. Rushed announcements, failed retention strategies, and no clear roadmap forward have made Unrivaled look like a league built on good intentions and shaky execution. That's not enough when your competition can outspend you tenfold. And if you can't adapt fast in this environment, you lose. Full stop. So where does Unrivaled go from here? Analysts say there are only three real options. 1. Fade out entirely. Let the money run dry and accept the inevitable. 2. Get acquired. Maybe by Project B, maybe by another investor looking to consolidate power. 3. Pivot. Change the schedule. Shift the model. Find a way to avoid direct competition and hang on long enough to rebuild. None of those are ideal. All of them carry risk. And the clock is ticking. Because this isn't just about basketball anymore. This is about power. About who gets to define the future of women's sports. About whether a league rooted in equity and empowerment can survive against the weight of global capital and media muscle. And about what happens when a movement loses momentum and doesn't know how to get it back. Unrivaled's collapse isn't just a business story. It's a warning. A case study in how quickly the balance of power can shift when financial force meets strategic weakness. And in a sports world that's becoming increasingly commercialized, that kind of shift can define entire generations of athletes. So here we are, watching it all unfold in real time. One league clawing to survive, another rising with unchecked momentum, and a cornerstone league facing a possible shutdown. The choices made in the next 12 months? They won't just shape next season. They'll shape the next decade. If you've been following this saga, now's your moment. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Is Unrivaled salvageable? Will Project B's global gamble pay off? And what happens to women's basketball if the WNBA hits pause? Make sure to like the video, share it with someone keeping tabs on the chaos, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next plot twist, because let's be honest, this story is far from over. At this point, no one can pretend this is just about one player leaving a league or a couple of front office missteps. The leaked audio peeled back the curtain, and what it revealed wasn't just chaos. It was a system unraveling, one that had positioned itself as a beacon for what women's sports could be. And now, it's hanging by a thread, outpaced, outbid, and outmaneuvered. Let's be clear, Unrivaled had a bold vision. It wasn't trying to be just another league. It wanted to change the game, literally and figuratively. Equity ownership for players wasn't just a nice perk. It was the foundation of the model. This was about shifting power, about putting athletes in control. And for a while, that promise resonated. It wasn't just a league, it was a movement. A reclamation of space in a sports world that too often treats women like an afterthought. But movements don't survive on ideology alone. They need strategy, infrastructure, and, whether anyone likes it or not, money. Big money. And that's where Project B comes in, like a wrecking ball in heels. Project B didn't come with slogans or soft launches. It came with numbers. And not just bigger paychecks, but global exposure, elite facilities, and a clear path for players to turn their careers into brands. It was a head-on collision between principle and power. And guess what won? The moment Alyssa Thomas switched sides, the balance shifted. You could feel it. It wasn't just that she was a star. It was that she had skin in the game. She believed in Unrivaled. She was one of the original players who helped legitimize the league. If someone like that is willing to walk, everyone starts questioning what they're holding on to. And Unrivaled's response? Disorganized, delayed, and, let's be honest, flat out embarrassing. A low-quality promotional post. Vague statements. No clarity. That's not how you manage a defection. That's how you pour gasoline on a fire. In the audio, you can literally hear the panic. Decision-makers scrambling. No clear plan. No contingency. Just people trying to spin an L into something less painful. But players talk. And once the trust starts leaking, the exits come faster than press releases. From there, it's a domino effect. Because this isn't an industry where athletes just want to win games. They want to build legacies, careers, longevity. And if a league looks unstable, players will chase the better offer. And Project B's offer? Too good to ignore. It's not just about salaries. It's about scale. Project B is playing an international game, staking territory in Europe, Asia, and any market willing to invest. That sounds exciting, but it also raises serious issues. Time zones, travel fatigue, disrupted schedules, and most importantly, diminished visibility for U.S. audiences. Because here's the part no one wants to admit. Being great at basketball isn't enough anymore. Visibility is currency. If fans can't watch you play, brands won't sign you. Social media numbers drop. Endorsements dry up. Your relevance takes a hit. In the women's sports space, where media coverage is already underfunded and inconsistent. That's a problem. Project B might be flashy, but their international strategy risks disconnecting athletes from their biggest audience, home. That should have been Unrivaled's edge. A stable domestic league, regular broadcasts, local endorsements, community roots. They could have owned that lane, but they were too slow to pivot, too reactive. And now they're not leading the narrative. They're watching it happen from the sidelines. And the worst part? All of this is happening with the WNBA hovering on the edge of crisis. The looming threat of the 2026 WNBA season being canceled is no longer just background noise. It's real. And if that happens, the ripple effects will be devastating. This isn't just about league logistics. It's about the entire U.S. women's basketball infrastructure. You pull one piece out, and the whole thing teeters. Players lose leverage. TV deals vanish. Development pipelines collapse. And in that power vacuum, the league with the deepest pockets and most momentum takes over. And right now, that's Project B. That's the chessboard everyone's playing on, even if Unrivaled still thinks it's checkers. And let's not pretend Unrivaled's remaining players haven't noticed. They see who's leaving. They see the chaos. And every player still wearing that jersey is asking themselves the same question. How much longer can this last? What we're watching is a case study in how fast control can be lost when a startup doesn't plan for disruption. Unrivaled wasn't ready for war. They were banking on goodwill and mission statements, hoping players would choose long-term equity over short-term cash. But that's not how it works in this economy. Because we're not just talking about athletes. We're talking about brands. Every player is their own business now, their own marketing team, their own ecosystem, and no one wants to bet on a sinking ship, no matter how noble the intentions. So what's left? Analysts say Unrivaled has three possible paths forward. 1. Fade into irrelevance. Quietly shut down and hope no one makes a 10-part docuseries about the collapse. 2. Get acquired. Hand the keys to Project B or a larger sports entity and try to salvage whatever value remains. 3. Pivot hard. Change the season calendar, focus on regional loyalty, rebuild the trust, and try to carve out a niche before Project B becomes too big to challenge. None of these are easy. All of them involve losses. And even the pivot, the so-called survival path, requires resources Unrivaled may not have. But what they do have is a lesson. This is what happens when you underestimate the speed at which power can shift in modern sports. It's no longer about legacy. It's about liquidity. And when that shift happens, you either adapt or you get replaced. Project B understood that from day one. They weren't building slowly, they were buying fast. Their playbook wasn't about vision. It was about velocity. Get the top players. Get the headlines. Build hype. And now, they've done exactly that. Unrivaled thought they had time. They didn't. Now, what we're seeing is the fallout, not just of one league's collapse, but of a wider reckoning across women's basketball. A reshuffling of the power structures. A clash between grassroots legitimacy and international capital. And through it all, the players are stuck in the middle, being asked to choose between competing models, neither of which has proven long-term sustainability. It's not fair, but it's real. And with the WNBA potentially stepping out of the picture, the stakes just went sky high. Because without that foundational league, everything else becomes speculative. The brand value, the endorsement pipeline, the exposure, all of it depends on a stable domestic season. And if that's gone, Project B gets to step in and claim the throne by default. And maybe that's the plan. Maybe the long-term play was never about fighting Unrivaled head-to-head. Maybe it was about waiting for the WNBA to falter, sweeping up all the fragmented pieces, and becoming the central force in women's basketball globally. If that's true, then Unrivaled wasn't the enemy. It was collateral damage. So here we are, a leaked audio file, a mass exodus of players, and a power shift that's not just changing who gets paid, it's changing who runs the game. Unrivaled wanted to be a revolution. But revolutions only work if you survive the first battle. The thing is, once the cracks start to show, they don't just stay cracks. They spread. Fast. What started as a few players switching allegiances has become a full-blown identity crisis. Not just for Unrivaled, but for women's basketball as a whole. And the leaked audio? That was the confirmation nobody wanted, but everybody feared. This wasn't a minor internal dispute or a disagreement over scheduling. It exposed something deeper. The fact that Unrivaled was built on shaky ground. And when pressure came from the outside, there wasn't a strong enough foundation to hold it up. You can only keep up appearances for so long when your top talent is walking out the door and your leadership is caught flat-footed with no cohesive strategy. Unrivaled had one job: protect the vision. Rally the players. Make it clear that despite Project B's flashy entrance, this league was still the future. But they couldn't do it, because they weren't ready for a competitor to come in with more money, more media muscle, and a global strategy that made their domestic-first model look small. Not wrong, but small. And once you start looking small in a game that's increasingly global, your days are numbered. Project B understood something Unrivaled didn't. That perception is power. And they wasted no time flipping the script. Instead of focusing on grassroots, momentum, or long-term ownership, they went after influence. Visibility. Legacy names. Veterans who came with built-in fan bases and brand credibility. Alyssa Thomas wasn't just a key player. She was the message. If she could walk away from a league she helped build, anyone could. And people did. What's devastating is that Unrivaled's response wasn't even denial. It was dysfunction. A clumsy rollout of Alyssa's departure, no follow-up narrative, and zero public-facing confidence. In that moment, the players who were still in the league had to be asking themselves, what exactly are we staying for? That's the quiet part no one wants to say out loud. Loyalty sounds noble until you realize you're the only one still holding the torch. And in professional sports, loyalty doesn't pay the bills. Especially when there's another league on the table offering more money, more exposure, and a louder microphone. Project B may have logistical hurdles, time zones, travel demands, market confusion, but that hasn't stopped them. They're throwing money at the problems, and so far it's working. They're giving players something tangible in the short term. And in a world where athletes have a finite window to cash in on their peak years, that short term looks very appealing. Meanwhile, Unrivaled looks like a lesson in what happens when ambition isn't matched with execution. They had a vision, but vision without strategy? That's just a daydream. You can't run a league on vibes, even if those vibes are rooted in equity and empowerment. Because when your competitor is outspending, out-recruiting, and out-positioning you globally, mission statements stop matching. People start asking real questions, like, what's my value in this league if the big names are leaving? Or, why stay loyal when the league doesn't even have a response plan? And maybe the hardest one of all, is this even going to exist in a year? Those questions are hanging in the air, unspoken but unavoidable, especially with the WNBA's 2026 season under threat. If that season doesn't happen, this entire house of cards could come down. The WNBA isn't just a league, it's the anchor, the central platform that ties together everything else. Without it, the off-season leagues lose their context. The players lose their leverage. The fans lose their focal point. And if that happens, Project B wins by default. Because what you're seeing here isn't just about two off-season leagues fighting over talent. This is about who controls the future of women's basketball, who writes the next chapter, who decides how athletes get paid, how fans engage, and how the sport grows. Unrivaled had the potential to lead that charge. But now they're barely holding on. Their options are narrowing, fade away, get acquired, or pivot drastically. But even a pivot won't save them if they don't start thinking several moves ahead. The time for reactionary decision-making is over. And while all of this unfolds, the players, the very people this was supposed to empower, are caught in the middle, choosing between ideals and income, between long-term belief and short-term security. And honestly, you can't blame them for picking the latter, because Project B is offering a version of the future that feels real. It may not be sustainable forever. It may have cracks of its own, but right now, it looks like the only plan that's working. And in a sport where every paycheck, every endorsement, every year of relevance matters, that's a compelling offer. What Unrivaled is facing isn't just a competitor, it's a reckoning. A reality check on what it takes to survive in a landscape dominated by global capital and accelerated media cycles. You don't get time to catch your breath. You either evolve or disappear. And unless something changes fast, Unrivaled won't just be remembered as a failed league. It'll be remembered as a missed opportunity. A moment when players finally had power and the people behind the scenes didn't know what to do with it. Let us know what you think in the comments. Is there still a way for Unrivaled to turn this around? Can Project B keep its promises? And what would it mean for the sport if the WNBA doesn't return in 2026? And like if you've been keeping up with this wild ride, share this with someone watching the power shift happen in real time, and don't forget to subscribe, because the fallout from this is just beginning.